Hi everyone, I'm Justina and I'm a pen tester and consultant at Bastion Security. And I've just got 3 years experience in cybersecurity industry. And with me today is my wonderful co-presenter, Louise Kendall. And she's a GRC consultant, also at Bastion Security, with around 7 years experience in the cybersecurity industry. So essentially, today, Lou and I will be co-presenting this talk we have aptly named How Not to Be a Dick in IT. Essentially, between the two of us, we've had a lot of interesting experiences between us and other people, and we decided to collaborate on this and create a talk about it. We hope from this talk you learn a little bit about how to not treat people in the industry, especially those who are new or may seem inexperienced.
We will share with you 4 stories from our careers so far where we have encountered dicks, which we'll call Richard Heads. So while we've decided to use the name Richard Heads for comedic effect, we also want to make very clear that the use of the name Richard is gender neutral. For each story, we'll explain what Richard did and provide you with some lessons learned so that you can understand what Richard should have done differently in these situations to not be a dick. Finally, we'll send you home with some key lessons that you can use to help yourself if you ever encounter a Richard of your own. So now I'm going to hand over to Justina to kick off with her first story about Richard.
Okay, so story 1. This one is called Justina Does Not Know What MFA is. So typically before an engagement starts, I always like to make sure I've got access to the environments just to avoid wasting billable time. So this means I'll check the URLs, I'll check the credentials are working, I'll check all that stuff and make sure that I can start the engagement with a bang. Now, for this specific client, I was trying to get access sorted with our point of contact, who we're going to call Mr. Head. I'm unable to log in with the username and password that he provides, and there's a lot of back and forth between me and him, and we waste so much time. By this point, we've wasted almost a week of billable time, and I still don't have access. So I managed to eventually get access to the environment. I keep testing, and then suddenly one day I wake up and access has stopped. So I flick an email to Mr. Head. He puts me in contact with a technical person, and I still can't resolve the issues. At this stage, Mr. Head steps in, and he insists it's the MFA which is the issue, to which I say, "No, Mr. Head, I don't think it's the MFA." To which he says, "I think it's the MFA." And because I recognize that this isn't going to go anywhere, I sent Mr. Head this email. Okay, so this is the real email I sent to him, and for people who can't read it says, "Hi, Mr. Head. When I log in, I'm always prompted for MFA. MFA method is TOTP. Just to make sure we haven't got any lines crossed, I've uploaded a video to Google Drive showing you how I log into the web application and the error messages that I receive. Please note the following. I've cleared all my previous browsing data, including cookies, etc. I log out and then back into my account with MFA. The 4 or 3 errors are still returned to me. Here's the link to the video. Kind regards, Justina." Now, note that this video I link, it's got the full process of me. It's a video of me logging in, putting my username, my password, putting the MFA in, and the access denied issues coming back. Now, if you were to receive this email from me, how would you reply it? Maybe reply 1, let's hop on a call to resolve this situation, or reply 2, which is something along the lines of putting me in contact with another technical person to see if I could resolve these issues. Well, the correct answer is neither, because this is the response that I got from Richard. Yikes. Right. Again, if you can't read it, it says, "Are you sure you know what MFA is, Mr. Head?" And then, as I'm about to reply to this email, he follows this tactful email with this one, which is randomly accusing me of not working. And that says, "You definitely were working yesterday, Justina, when the multi-permissions / accounts were in place." Now, at this stage, I am very, very confused. Mr. Head has blamed me for 2 things: not knowing what MFA is, and also not working, both of which I have actual evidence against through the videos I sent him, other screenshots that you guys haven't seen, and all other things I've supplemented my emails with. So, incredibly confused. So we schedule a meeting with him and his team to resolve these access issues. On my side, there's me, some fellow co-workers also on this project, a project coordinator, and on his side, Mr. Head has some external contractors who built the website, and unbeknownst to me, a surprise guest, who is the person in charge of the logs to the website I'm supposed to be testing. In this meeting, he makes sure that everyone is there, and then he goes straight into it and starts to berate me for not doing work in front of everyone, using the log keeper to back him up. And he also keeps insisting that I don't know what MFA is. However, whilst attempting to resolve these issues, we come to the realization that logging wasn't turned on at all, which is why there were no logs coming through and why he thought I wasn't doing testing. Furthermore, the MFA issue was because of some configuration issues which their developers had been fiddling around with whilst I was testing, and that's why I was able to log in, and then for some reason not able to log in anymore. So cool story, right? But what exactly did Mr. Head do to be a Richard in this situation? Well, there are two main things. The first thing is he jumped to conclusions, and he shouldn't have. When we were trying to resolve the MFA issue, I gave him evidence of what I was doing, and evidence that it wasn't my MFA that was the issue. However, he disregarded all of it, and then jumped to the conclusion that I just didn't know what was going on. The second thing was he was publicly shaming me. Richard also tried to publicly shame me for not doing work, and he made sure that everyone was there before he started to tell me off. Now, this scenario does have nuance to it. If a client is paying us to do work and we aren't doing work, they have by every right the ability to challenge us because they're paying us to do this. However, Richard trying to do so in a public forum was not the right place to do so, especially because he hadn't gotten all the facts right for this.
All right, now it's my turn. Story number 2, no disrespect, I'm just a young girl. This story actually occurred to me about a year or so ago, and not that my age should actually be all that important, but just for context, I still get ID'd at the supermarket, but when they see the birth date on my driver's license, they quickly push the no birth date needed button on the self-service machine. Now, we're all guilty of saying things without thinking. However, when you start a sentence with no disrespect, you've clearly done a bit of thinking about the next words that are going to come out of your mouth. Our story starts with an engagement that my colleague was going to lead with a client he already knew fairly well. But due to some unforeseen circumstances, they were no longer able to lead the work, so I was asked to. I'd run one of these engagements many times before, so absolutely not a problem. On screen is an email from my colleague to Richard stating that I'll be the primary consultant on the engagement going forward. This was a pretty clear message to Richard that my colleague will be taking a back seat and that I'm in charge. See in particular the phrases change in lead and the primary consultant on the engagement on the assessment will be Louise Kendall. So like a good consultant, I set up a kick-off meeting. I'm sure many of us here have been involved in kick-off meetings. They're fairly straightforward. They're essentially a way to get everyone involved in the project on the same page. Classic steps include introductions, who you are, what you're doing, providing an overview of what we'll be doing on the engagement, next steps to get the engagement moving, and anything else that you might want to touch upon. If there's additional points you want to cover, go for it. Nothing in there for a Richard to ruin, right? I thought I'd join the call, run through my plan, answer a couple of questions, then merrily skip off to lunch. Think again. I forgot the most important step of a kick-off meeting. Silly me forgot to include Richard's agenda item, no disrespect. But what did Richard not want to disrespect? Not even 5 minutes into the meeting, Richard interrupts me and starts directing questions at my colleague. Let's call him John. Easy project management questions that I could answer and I had prepared for. I tried to jump in, but no. Richard only wanted to talk to John. But everyone, it's okay. Why, you ask? Because when Richard stopped me mid-sentence, they said, no disrespect to the young girl. Cool. Thank you, Richard. No disrespect at all. John tried to get Richard to direct their questions to me, but it was a lost cause. Every time I tried to answer, Richard cut me off and directed his questions to John. As far as Richard was concerned, I was a young girl and I couldn't answer their very important questions. I left that meeting feeling confused and wondering what I had said wrong to make Richard ignore me like that. There was no skipping to lunch, only a very, very slow walk. But I have to tell you though, John was outraged with Richard and discussed it with our boss, who was equally outraged. And, like any good boss, they gave me the option to not work on the engagement because no one should ever have to put up with that sort of disrespect, even though Richard heavily caveated it with no disrespect. I personally chose to continue with the engagement, and everything did work out well in the end. I reiterated to Richard that I was the lead for the engagement and that his questions should come to me, and it was happy days. However, this isn't quite where our story ends though. This is a meme that my boss made about the incident and put it on his socials. It reads, "This is the client Bill. Bill is an older man. Bill doesn't refer to younger consultants as girls. Bill just respects their expertise. Be like Bill." So, how do you not be a dick in this situation? Number one, don't judge a book by its cover. Just because of how someone looks doesn't mean you know everything about them. They might know more than you. Number two, think before you speak. When you start a sentence with no disrespect, you clearly know that the next words out of your mouth could cause disrespect. And three, of course, be like Bill. So no disrespect, Richard, but you're a dick in this situation.
Okay, story 3. Don't dump Alsace. So once upon a time, there was a young, talented, very talented, and humble pen tester, which had been arranged to go on site to do a host review. So what exactly is a host review, though? It's when you assess a host, like at a very high level, it's when you assess a host for badly configured settings that could leave it in a weaker state that could be used by an attacker. So how do I go about doing this host review? 3 steps. First step, I go on site one morning and I get in contact with a technical guy who we are going to call Peter. He helps me get access to the host that I'm supposed to be testing. He physically stands behind me. He gives me the credentials to log in. And then eventually we get to the right host and he says, "You're testing this one." Then, step 2, I plug in my USB, I transfer scripts across to the host, and I realize I don't have local administrator access. Without this, I can't run the scripts, I can't check the right settings, so I ask Peter for local admin access. He asks why, I tell him why, and he immediately logs in and gives me local admin access. From here, I'm able to run the scripts and manually check the outcome from them. The thing about this, though, is I can see that the host isn't very well configured. And so I go one step further and above by showing the client what an attacker might be able to do on this host. I do that by transferring Mimikatz onto the host, running it, and then manually dumping Alsace, and then feeling really good about myself. And then step 3, I transfer all my evidence onto the USB, and I head back to the office to write the report. Now, I head back to the office absolutely buzzing. It's my first host review. I've done it all by myself, and all I can think is, well done, Justina. You have absolutely nailed it. You've managed to fully compromise the host that you had local admin access to, and you've dumped Alsace. You are a bloody legend. But the next day, I get a call from Richard, the guy who arranged this pen test. So Richard to Justina, "Did you run Mimikatz and dump Alsace on a host?" Me to Richard, "Yeah, I did. Yeah, thanks for asking. You should work on that, not good." Richard to Justina, "Okay, so you did all of that on the wrong host. It was supposed to be a Linux machine, and you started an incident response process. You need to email me with a written statement with why you've done this, and you need to come in tomorrow to explain yourself." Fuck. Oh my God. What do I do now? Clearly in deep shit. Started incident response process, and the whole cybersecurity team is freaking out. So what do? I first send an email, a written explanation to Richard, telling what I did, and he's actually very, very good about everything. So you're all probably sitting there thinking, why are you telling us this story, Justina? It sounds like you're the dick in this scenario. And, well, the next day, I still have to go on site. So I get on site, and both Richard and Peter are there. They're both standing up, and they've got a chair in front of them, and they tell me to sit down in the chair. And then in the middle of this open-planned office, so that everyone can hear in his best outdoor voice, he tells me that I'm going to have to do the host review again. Fair enough. But then he follows up with this in this tone. So you're going to have to come back and do this again. But don't worry. We'll make sure that there's lots of people around so you can ask lots of questions and you'll have lots of support. Not too long after this conversation as well, one of Richard and Peter's colleagues come across and asks if they want a coffee. Peter sighs, says, "I think so," looks directly at me, and then says, "I think it's going to be a long day." Now, there are a few things to note here. First of all, I probably shouldn't have done the things I did. I should have given them a heads up before I started running things that are flagged as malware by any OK, SOC team, or Microsoft Defender. So again, I wasn't 100% right in this scenario, but there were at least 3 situations or 3 things that Richard and Peter did that really officiated the status as a certified Richard head. The first thing was public shaming again. For some reason, the 2 of them decided that this would be the appropriate place, an open office where everyone in the whole company can hear what's going on, was the right place to have a conversation about what I did wrong. Secondly, they became very passive-aggressive. Afterwards, the passive-aggressiveness just increased to the point where even email chains, they were CCing me in, blaming me for random things that I hadn't done, and they also decided to physically seat me down and talk down to me like I was a toddler. If they wanted to do that, they didn't need to sit me down. I'm very sure they just could have a conversation with me normally. And lastly, Peter pushed all of the blame on me. When I was getting told off for testing the wrong host, Peter never once said that he was the one that gave me the wrong host. He let me get told off for this mistake, and then he added to it by pretending that I was the one who had done everything wrong and just gone haywire, essentially.
And our final story number 4, performance reviews. So being a manager, it can be incredibly rewarding, but I'll be the first to admit it's not always coffee catch-ups and gold stars. When a manager is good, we learn from them and we remember them for our entire careers. And when a manager is bad, we also learn from them and we remember them for our entire careers. Unlike my last story, this one happened very early in my career. In fact, this story happened during one of my first experiences with performance reviews. For those of you who don't know me, I was an A+ student and who wasn't really a rule breaker, so I was expecting a lot from this first performance review. Looking back on the experience now, however, it is definitely not one I will ever forget. I can definitely identify a thing or 2 that I should have done differently, but with age comes wisdom, and in your very early 20s, wisdom is still a few years off. What I can say, however, is that Richard showed me exactly what not to do by demonstrating very clearly how to be a dick. So, for everyone here is a quick overview of the meeting. I went into my manager's office, also known as Richard's office, and sat down on the other side of the desk. I thought we were there to discuss my performance over the last 6 months and my goals for the next 6 months. Silly me. What I didn't know was that Richard had spoken to another manager from a team that I was interested in moving into. This team did work that aligned with my career goals a bit more, so I previously had a couple of discussions with the manager, but I had not told Richard. So, for the first 25 minutes of the performance review meeting, we discussed the good work I'd done, how well I fitted in with the team, and that I had a bright future at the company. Overall, I was feeling very good, and I even had the slightest hope that I could get a bonus. Very quickly, however, this dream was dashed. Because just as I was about to stand up and thank Richard for their time, they said, "So, I hear you want to join another team." The tone could easily be described as accusatory. Not really my tone, I'm not great at acting. All these years later, I can still feel this drop in my stomach when I think about it. Not expecting this or being prepared, I just mumbled, I'd been looking into it. I honestly thought that I had done the worst thing in the world. I thought I was about to get fired. Everything had been going so well, all I could think was shit. And Richard wasn't even done yet. Richard then proceeded to yell at me from the other side of their desk, telling me that I had wasted their time. Richard then told me that I was too old to be changing careers and that I needed to hurry up and decide what I wanted to do with my life because I was wasting it. Let me just remind you again, I was very early 20s at this stage. The ink was still drying on my university degree. So, to top it off, Richard abruptly stood up from their desk and stormed out of their office, leaving me completely alone. Shocked would be an understatement. This is a person who had never had a detention at school, been yelled at and told that they are wasting their life. My mind was completely blank. So what do? Cry. A pretty natural response, I'd say. I sat there for a few moments just trying to process what had gone on, then quickly ran out of Richard's office to the stairwell and sat there sobbing. After some time, a colleague came and got me, and we went for a walk outside so I could stop tearing up and build up enough courage so I could go back and sit at my desk. Richard never apologised though, or ever really actually spoke to me again, because within a couple of weeks I'd actually changed teams. So, how to not be a dick? Well, as I said at the start, I definitely should have mentioned to Richard that I was interested in changing teams and had spoken with the other manager. I needed to be upfront and honest about that. However, that doesn't excuse Richard's reaction. Other than the obvious, don't yell at your staff. If they do upset you or do something that you do not agree with, take a breath. Think before you speak, especially if you're in a position of power and working with a younger person who is new to the workforce and will hang on every word that you say. And 3, remember, while there are company priorities, you as a manager are there to help your staff grow and achieve their goals. If their goals are different to yours, then work with them to figure out a compromise, and if needs be, help them to make that next jump to what will make them happy. But really, number 1, don't yell at someone. So, Richard, while I'll take some of the blame here, you were well out of line.
So, to summarise everything, Lou and I have put together a very nice checklist of things that you can go through and make sure, you can make sure you know how not to be a dick. The first one is thinking before you speak. In each of the stories we told, each of these situations could have been avoided or handled much better if the people, the Richards, had thought about their words before they spoke. The Richard who called me up for not doing work would have realised that I had sent video evidence of knowing what MFA is and also doing work. Richard who said no disrespect to Lou would have realised that there was very much disrespect about the words that were coming out of his mouth. The Richard who reprimanded me in front of the whole office would have realised that that was not an appropriate forum to do so. And finally, the Richard who yelled at Lou inside his office would have realised that that was not the appropriate way to confront her. The next thing is to see the bigger picture. At the end of the day, there's always a bigger picture to everything. It is often crucial to take a step back and look at the scenario from different angles to gain a full understanding of what's happening. And this can help us prevent from jumping to conclusions and approaching things in a thoughtful manner. For example, in Lou's story about the review, the Richard had put the focus on himself and his feelings, as opposed to Lou and why Lou wanted to move. Lou didn't want to do that because she was being malicious and didn't like him. It wasn't done out of spite, but much rather curiosity. In my story, where I tested the wrong host and started incident response process, Richard focused on the fact that I tested the wrong host and started IR, but never wondered how I managed to get access to the wrong host in the first place, and how I managed to get access to the Windows machine if somebody didn't give me the right credentials. And the last thing, treat people with respect. If you can't remember anything from this talk at all, just remember this and you'll be sorted for life. In all of the 4 stories shared, this should have always been an underlying thing. MFA's story would have meant not accusing me of not knowing what MFA is. For Lou's story about the disrespect, it would have meant not calling people young girls and other derogatory sort of names, and also treating her like a professional and using her expertise. For the Elsa story, it meant not talking down to me as a person and not publicly shaming me. And finally, for the performance review story, it means not shouting at Lou and trying to belittle them, even in a private setting.
And finally, it would be remiss of us to not leave you with some advice in case you find yourself in a situation where you have your own Richard to deal with. I wish I could promise you that you would never ever have to work with a Richard, but unfortunately, I can't. First lesson, you can't stop people being mean, but you can take yourself out of a shitty scenario. When someone is no longer treating you with respect and making you feel bad, you have the power to remove yourself, even if it's just for a short time, take yourself away from the Richard. Second lesson, find those people that will advocate for you and stand up for you. While I said that you'll unfortunately encounter Richards in your career, you'll encounter far more people that will stand in your corner and help you when you need it. For example, John and my boss that backed me when Richard chose to not disrespect me. More than giving me the option to get out of the shitty situation, God, that's hard to say, they reminded me that I do know what I'm doing and that Richard's assumptions about me meant nothing. And finally, remind yourself it's them, not you. When someone chooses to be a Richard, remember that choice is on them, not on you. As Justina and I have both shared, we weren't perfect in every situation, but at no point did our actions warrant us being treated how we were. I certainly felt 100% responsible for Richard storming out on me during my performance review, but on reflection, in no world is that an acceptable reaction from them. So, while we've shared some advice to all the Richards out there about being less of a dick, unfortunately, we can't force them all to listen to this presentation. Therefore, our parting words to you is, do not let these Richards make you think any less of yourself. It is them, not you. Thank you.
I am a super genius.